Welcome to Story Medicine. I'm Joe Summerfield. For over 20 years, I've been working to better understand and support people in navigating this human experience. I've come to believe that stories are encoded with the collective wisdom of all who have come before us, that they bring us into connection with the collective unconscious, and contain treasure waiting to be decoded. This podcast explores traditional tales through that lens. Each episode offers a story told in full, an exploration of the medicine it may be offering, and 3 practices to help you to integrate that medicine. Today's story comes from ancient Mesopotamia, the land between 2 rivers in what is now Iraq. It is the great Epic of Gilgamesh, and it's amongst the oldest written stories in human history. The standard Babylonian version was compiled around 1200 BCE by the scribe Sinlekiunini, drawing on Sumerian sources that reach back as far as 2100 BCE. The epic was preserved on clay tablets, buried for thousands of years, and excavated in the 19th century from the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh. It carries medicine about grief, mortality, and the hard-won return to what is ordinary and real. Let's begin. Part 1. The story. Long ago, in the city of Uruk, between the 2 rivers, there was a king. His name was Gilgamesh, 2/3 god and 1/3 man, so the tablets tell us, blessed by the gods with extraordinary strength, a face like the sun at midday, and a restless, driving energy that could not be stilled. He had seen the countries of the world and brought back wisdom from before the flood. He had built the great walls of Uruk and the sacred precinct of Eanna, and he had carved his deeds into stone so that they would outlast him. He was magnificent. Magnificent and alone. There was no one in all of Uruk who could meet him as an equal. No one who could stand beside him without flinching. He took what he wanted, when he wanted it. He drove the young men to exhaustion with ceaseless contests. The people cried out to the gods for relief, and the gods listened. The goddess Aruru pressed her hands into the earth to reach clay and water, and she shaped a man unlike any other, wild, enormous, covered in hair, and as strong as the rocky hills. This was Enkidu. He ran with the gazelles in the grasslands. He drank at the watering holes beside the lions. He knew nothing of cities, nothing of walls or thrones or ambition. He was made of the same earth that had made everything, and he lived in it the way that the animals did. Word of this wild man reached Uruk eventually. A trapper came before the king and described what he had seen, a man who moved through wilderness like a force of nature, who filled in his traps and set the animals free. Gilgamesh listened, and something stirred within him. He had dreamt of something falling from the sky, a great meteor landing in the streets of Uruk. In his dream, crowds had gathered, but the meteor was too heavy for him to lift alone. He found himself drawn to it, unable to look away. His mother Ninsun interpreted his dream. A companion is coming, one who will never forsake you. Gilgamesh wondered whether perhaps this wild man might be his companion. Through a chain of encounters, Enkidu was drawn toward the city. And when he finally walked through the gates of Uruk, he came face to face with Gilgamesh, and the streets shook with their meeting. And they fought. Of course they fought. 2 forces of nature could not meet in any other way. They grappled in the streets, in the doorways, their contest shaking the walls like cedar trees in a storm. And then, at the height of it, something shifted. Gilgamesh stepped back. The rage left him, and he looked at the man before him, this wild, extraordinary creature, and he recognized something that he had never encountered before, his equal. From that meeting, something entirely new began. Enkidu became the companion that Gilgamesh had never had, the one who would not flinch, who stood beside him without flattery or fear, who saw him clearly and chose him. And in Enkidu's presence, something in Gilgamesh opened that had never opened before. Together, it seemed, they were unstoppable. Gilgamesh proposed that they journey to the great cedar forest, sacred realm of the gods, guarded by the terrifying Humbaba, to cut its trees and to win immortal glory. Enkidu resisted. The forest was sacred, he said. Humbaba was its guardian for a reason. Mortals had no business there. Enkidu knew the order of the wild and understood that some boundaries exist because they should. But Gilgamesh pressed, and Enkidu, through love and loyalty, went along with him anyway. By the time they stood before Humbaba, Gilgamesh's nerve began to fail him, and now it was Enkidu who urged him forward. They slew Humbaba and cut the sacred trees. Then they turned for home, floating the timber back to Uruk on a raft. When Gilgamesh arrived in the city, he washed the dust of the journey from himself and put on his royal robes. And it was then, seeing him restored, golden and triumphant, that the goddess Ishtar was struck with desire. She came to him and offered herself as his bride. Gilgamesh refused her, bluntly, cruelly even, listing the lovers that she had destroyed before him one by one. So Ishtar sent the bull of heaven down to destroy him in revenge. Enkidu wrestled the bull by the horns and then held it by the tail while Gilgamesh thrust his sword between its shoulders and killed it. Then Enkidu wrenched off one of the bull's haunches and hurled it at Ishtar on the city wall, shouting that he would do the same to her if he could. So the gods assembled. 2 mortals had slain Humbaba, sacred guardian of the forest. 2 mortals had killed the bull of heaven. One of them must die, and the gods chose Enkidu. Enkidu fell ill. He lay on his bed in Uruk and grew weaker day by day while Gilgamesh sat beside him. In the night Enkidu dreamed of the underworld, a grey, lightless place he called the House of Dust, where the dead wore feathers like birds and ate clay for food, where great kings worked as servants, and where everything that had been built above ground dissolved into shadow. He woke from the dream, cursing. He cursed the trapper who had first spotted him in the wild. He cursed Shamhat, the woman who had drawn him toward the city and towards this friendship that had brought him to his deathbed. And then, slowly, he withdrew those curses. The god Shamash had spoken to him in the dark and reminded him of what he'd been given: bread and wine, fine garments, a great companion, and honor. And Enkidu remembered. He remembered the feasts, the adventures, and the man sitting even now beside his bed. And he blessed Shamhat instead. For 12 days his condition worsened, and then he was gone. Gilgamesh refused to believe it. He sat beside the body and would not leave. He called on the mountains to mourn, on the rivers, the wild animals, and on the people of Uruk. He tore his hair, he ripped his clothes, he wept without ceasing. He stayed for 6 days and 7 nights, watching the face of his friend for any signs of return, until his dear friend's body made denial impossible. And then Gilgamesh rose. He dressed himself, not in the robes of a king, but in animal skins, and he walked out into the wilderness. He was now a man who had looked at death, not in battle, where there's noise and the press of your own aliveness, but up close, in a room, in the face of someone he had loved, and he was afraid. He set out to find Utnapishtim, the one man to whom the gods had granted immortality. If such a thing existed, he would find it. He would demand the secret. He, Gilgamesh, would not meet the same fate as his friend. The journey took him to the ends of the earth. He passed through the twin peaks of Mount Mashu, through a tunnel of complete darkness beneath the mountain, walking 12 leagues without a thread of light, until he emerged into a garden of jeweled trees beside an unknown sea. There he met Siduri, a woman who kept a tavern at the edge of the world. She looked at the great king, dressed in skins, hollow-eyed and grief-worn, and she spoke plainly to him. She said, "When the gods created humankind, they allotted death to mankind, but life they kept in their own hands. As for you, Gilgamesh, let your belly be full. Make merry day and night. Let your clothes be clean. Let your head be washed. Cherish the little ones who hold your hand. Let a wife delight in your embrace. This alone is the concern of humankind." Gilgamesh listened, and then he walked right past her, deeper into the world's edge, still searching. He found Ur-Shanabi, the ferryman, and crossed the waters of death. And then he found Utnapishtim, at last the immortal, at the far shore of the world. And Utnapishtim told him what Siduri had already told him. The gods fixed death for mankind. There is no door. There is no secret. This is the order of things. But then Utnapishtim offered him a test. Could Gilgamesh, the great, relentless king, simply stay awake for 7 days? Gilgamesh sat down to prove himself, and he fell immediately asleep. Utnapishtim's wife baked a loaf of bread each day that Gilgamesh slept, and when Gilgamesh finally woke, there were 7 loaves before him, the first hard and dry, the last still fresh. The 7 days of his sleeping counted out in bread. He couldn't deny it. Before Gilgamesh left empty-handed, Utnapishtim's wife urged her husband to give him something for his journey. Utnapishtim relented and told Gilgamesh of a plant that grew at the bottom of the sea. It would not give him immortality, but it would restore youth. So Gilgamesh dove down to the ocean floor and wrenched the plant free. He carried it all the way home. On the last night before arriving back to Uruk, Gilgamesh set the plant on the bank of a pool and went down into the water to wash. A serpent smelled the plant's sweetness and rose from the water. It swallowed the plant whole and slid back down beneath the surface, shedding its skin as it went. Gilgamesh sat down on the bank and wept. He was exhausted, and then he rose and he walked home. He came to the walls of Uruk, the walls that he had built, the walls that had stood all this while, and he looked at them. He began to speak to Ur-Shanabi, the ferryman, who had made this last part of the journey with him. He spoke of the walls, their dimensions, the precision of their laying. He spoke of the orchards, of the temple, of the foundations of fired brick. He didn't speak of glory. He spoke of what remained. And so the oldest story ends with the medicine Siduri had offered at the edge of the world finally having landed, in a man standing at his own walls, seeing them perhaps for the first time. Part 2. The Medicine. Let's explore the medicine that this story may be offering us. Before we begin, if you know somebody who might appreciate this story's medicine right now, please share this episode with them. And if you're enjoying the podcast and would like to help others to find it too, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. Thank you. This story opens with a problem: a king who has never truly met anyone. Gilgamesh is immensely capable, but that capability, in the complete absence of anyone who can meet him, turns destructive. He is restless and raging from a kind of relational emptiness. No one holds their ground, no one pushes back. As he moves through Uruk, everything yields, and in that endless yielding there is no encounter, there's no friction, there's no real contact with another person. I think this speaks to something that we might recognize in our own lives. Perhaps not in quite such dramatic form, but the pattern is familiar. The person whose competence means that they're rarely challenged. The party in a relationship who wins out every time. The leader whose authority means that people tell them what they want to hear. The individual who is somehow always in charge, always the strongest person in the room, and who is, underneath that, profoundly alone. Gilgamesh is a man starved of genuine encounter. The tablets tell us that he is 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. And again, I think in a sense this is a story about all of us, about a process that we all face. We all begin life as infants, as the centre of our own universe, unindividuated, in some sense boundless, not yet aware of the limits that will eventually define us. As we grow, we come to encounter the true order of things, our limits, other people's limits, the true scale of time, and eventually mortality itself. The fall from the feeling of divinity. This is a reckoning that we all face in some form. Gilgamesh is simply experiencing it in the most extreme version possible, because his divine portion appears to give him genuine cause to push back against what he feels is his birthright to omnipotence and immortality. And so this is his journey. And throughout the story he seems to display a level of strong-headedness that necessitates the escalation of the medicine again and again. Gilgamesh resists every dose, and the gods have to keep escalating. A wild man of extraordinary power isn't enough. He recruits him into more conquest. And so the wild man has to die. The wisest counsel imaginable from a woman at the edge of the world isn't enough. He walks straight past her. He has to fail a simple test. He has to lose the plant to a snake while washing himself. He has to exhaust every last strategy before the medicine lands. The gods essentially having to turn up the volume again and again because Gilgamesh keeps finding a way not to hear. But I don't think that we're so different. Most of us will recognize lessons that return in different forms because we didn't fully receive them the first time. The relationship that breaks in the same way as the last one. The burnout that arrives again because we didn't change what caused the first one. The grief that we thought we had processed that surfaces untouched years later. Life will keep escalating the medicine until we can no longer avoid it. And there is another dimension to this. Gilgamesh's resistance is part of the same quality that makes him magnificent. His drive, his refusal to accept limits, his relentless forward motion. These are the same forces that built the walls of Uruk, that carved his deeds into stone. His gift and his wound are the same thing. And perhaps again there is medicine here for us, in that what we most need to integrate is rarely separate from our greatest strength. It's often woven into it. So, back to the story. In the first instance, what the gods create in response to his condition is a meeting with a complementary equal. Enkidu is shaped from clay and water, earth and the primordial. He isn't simply a rough man without education. He is humanity before the split, before civilization drew its line between the human world and the natural one. He belongs to the earth in the same way that the animals do, and the way that some part of each of us does, a part that perhaps we have inadvertently worked hard to overcome. He has no hunger for legacy, no need for his name to outlast him. He is present in a way that Gilgamesh has never been. It is through fighting and meeting limits that they recognize each other. We might understand this as an encounter with the shadow, with the parts of ourselves that we've rejected or never developed. And that's true, but I think what's happening here is even more specific than that. Because Enkidu isn't simply what Gilgamesh has pushed away. He carries something that Gilgamesh has never had access to at all, a capacity for genuine encounter, for real contact with another person, with the creaturely world, and with his own nature. And I think what the meeting with Enkidu does is restore in Gilgamesh something that his relentless, crowding out energy has displaced. You cannot truly meet another person if the only mode available to you is dominance. When Enkidu holds his ground, when something finally doesn't yield, there is, for the first time, space. And into that space, something enters that had never been there before. Both men start moving towards something more fully human. Enkidu moves towards culture, language, bread, belonging, and Gilgamesh begins moving toward presence, limitation, and something like a truer essence. So his transformation begins, but it doesn't complete. Watch what happens when Gilgamesh proposes the cedar forest expedition. Enkidu resists. He tells Gilgamesh that the forest is sacred and that Humbaba is its guardian for a good reason, that the mortals have no business there. In that moment, Enkidu is speaking from his original nature, the part that knows the sacred order of the wild, and that understands that some boundaries exist because they should. But Gilgamesh overrides him, and Enkidu, perhaps through love and loyalty, goes anyway. And by the time they're standing before Humbaba and Gilgamesh's nerves begin to fail, it's Enkidu who urges him forward. The man who was made in the wilderness and once knew the sacred order of things ends up hurling a sacred animal's flesh at a goddess. This is reversal. The being who was brought in perhaps to check Gilgamesh's driving, conquering energy has been absorbed into it. He's become a part of it. What was supposed to be the medicine for Gilgamesh has been recruited by the wound. I think this is one of the most important patterns that this story illuminates, and it's very much alive in our own lives. Think of someone who has spent years being too accommodating, always putting others first, rarely saying no, their own needs perpetually set aside. They come to recognize this, perhaps through therapy, perhaps through a relationship that finally breaks under the weight of it. They contact the anger and the self-assertion that were always there but suppressed, the shadow aspects. But instead of metabolizing it, letting it find its proper place as groundedness, as self-respect, and as clear and boundary limits, it takes over. They become combative. Every relationship starts to feel like a battleground. They begin fighting imaginary battles, seeing oppression where there's simply ordinary friction. The shadow has surfaced, but it hasn't been integrated. It's just flipped polarity. Enkidu's deviation follows this shape. He doesn't integrate the civilized world into his natural wisdom. He loses his natural wisdom to the civilized world's hunger for conquest. The meeting that was meant to transform Gilgamesh becomes instead two mighty beings side by side doing more of the same, more of what was already the problem. So the gods respond to this by choosing Enkidu to die. And perhaps Enkidu's death does what his presence could not. What presence could not do for Gilgamesh, loss might. There is something here about how we learn. Some medicine can only arrive through loss, through failure, through the collapse of the strategies that we've employed to avoid it. Gilgamesh can't conquer his way into wisdom, and Enkidu's dying is itself medicine. And so we come to Enkidu's death. As he lies ill, he dreams of the house of dust and the dead in the underworld eating clay. Enkidu is of course made of clay and water. The material of his making has become the food of dissolution. He is returning to what he came from. He wakes from that dream cursing. He curses the trapper who first found him. He curses Shamhat, who drew him towards the city and towards this friendship that brought him to his deathbed. He curses the conditions of his own story. And then he takes those curses back. Because he's reminded of what those same conditions gave him, the bread and the wine, the companionship, the honor, the life that he actually lived. He moves from cursing to gratitude. He holds at once what life required of him and what it gave him. That movement, from cursing the conditions of your story to finding something like gratitude within them, without collapsing the tension between the two, is its own medicine. And it feels true to what grief does when we let it run its full course rather than cutting it short. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh's grief is one of the oldest descriptions of bereavement in literature, and it illustrates very clearly what grief does to a person. Gilgamesh stays 6 days and 7 nights beside the body, refusing to accept what's happened. This is the full weight of attachment refusing to release, what we might recognize as the early, raw phase of loss, where part of the self simply will not move into the new reality, where the mind knows, but where grief is avoided by refusing acceptance. When he rises, he strips off his royal garments and puts on animal skins. He goes into the wilderness, to the unstructured, to the uncontained, the place outside of the human order that he's spent his life building and inhabiting. Across cultures and throughout history, wilderness is where people go when the structures of our life fall apart or are no longer suitable, the desert or the forest or the mountain. And of course, Enkidu was made in the wilderness. So without him knowing it, grief takes Gilgamesh in the direction of what he lost. And I think we might recognize this too, how in loss we often find ourselves reaching towards what the person we lost represented, integrating their influence, visiting their places, taking up their habits, moving without quite knowing why into the shape of the absence, carrying something of them forward. So, Gilgamesh continues on his journey. He meets Siduri at the edge of the world, and what she says to him is essentially the medicine that the whole story is moving toward, delivered directly, clearly, at the midpoint of his journey, and he walks straight past it. And I love how clear and direct this is. This was written in stone thousands of years ago, in plain and practical terms for all of us to read. She tells him, very simply, when the gods created humankind, they allotted death to mankind, but life they retained in their own keeping. The gods didn't give humans death as something they suffer. They kept life, unending, immortal existence as their own possession. Death is simply what follows from not having that. It isn't a solvable problem. It is the structure of what it means to be human. And having said that, having spoken the truth of the human condition as plainly as it's ever been spoken, Siduri tells us what to do with this. Clean clothes, a washed head, a child's hand, a wife's embrace, food and warmth today. This is her medicine. Presence to life that is actually here, rather than the life that we wish we had or what we fear we might lose. Gilgamesh hears this, and he walks past her. He's not ready to receive it because yet again he is refusing acceptance. So he crosses the waters of death. He finds Utnapishtim, the immortal, and Utnapishtim, before saying anything else, gives him a very simple test. Just stay awake for 7 days. Gilgamesh, who stormed the cedar forest, who fought the bull of heaven, who has walked through 12 leagues of complete darkness, sits down to prove himself, because he is still labouring under the illusion of mastery. And he immediately falls asleep. The proof lies in the 7 loaves that he wakes to find in front of him. The man who would conquer death cannot conquer even sleep. The body simply is what it is. He is inescapably human, not 2/3 divine in this moment, just a man who fell asleep when he meant to stay awake. And then the plant, found at the bottom of the sea and carried all the way home, is taken by a serpent in a moment of ordinary inattention while he washes. He had it, and he lost it, in unspectacular circumstances while he was doing something as unremarkable as cleaning himself. And then he comes home. He walks to the walls of Uruk, and he begins to describe them to his ferryman, the dimensions, the fired brick, the orchards, the temple, the foundations. He's not talking about his legacy or trying to conquer. He's just noticing what's there. He's taking it in. And it seems to me that in this moment, finally, his medicine is received, and it came through sheer exhaustion, through grief doing its long, unglamorous work, through the failure of every other strategy that he tried to employ to avoid it. What Gilgamesh arrives at finally is presence, the capacity to be here, in this city, with these walls, with this human life, without needing it to be something else. This story is 4,000 years old, written on clay tablets in a civilization that no longer exists, and it has survived because it's true. It is true that grief strips the king of his robes. It is true that we pursue our own versions of immortality, achievement, legacy, busyness, the relentless forward drive, in order to avoid sitting with the loss. It is true that those quests fail, and it is true that something becomes available on the other side of that failure that could not have arrived any other way. It is also true, perhaps, that the shadow we are given to integrate can become, if we're not careful, simply a new version of the old wound. That meeting an equal does not automatically mean being transformed by the meeting. And one of the oldest things that our ancestors thought to write down and keep, the thing they pressed into clay so that it might outlast them and find its way to us, was this: let your belly be full, make merry day and night. Let your clothes be clean, let your head be washed. Cherish the little one who holds your hand. Let a wife delight in your embrace. This alone is the concern of humankind. Presence to the ordinary, that is what they passed forward to us. Part 3. Integration Practices. The medicine for us doesn't come from understanding these patterns intellectually. In order for insight to create change in our lives, we need to invite it into our body and into our lived experience. Here are 3 practices to help you to integrate this story's medicine. First practice, the lesson that keeps returning. Gilgamesh needed the gods to escalate the medicine again and again, a wild companion, a death, a journey to the end of the earth, before it finally landed. Most of us have a version of this. Take 20 minutes with your journal and think of a lesson that has come back to you more than once. The same essential teaching arriving in different relationships, different circumstances, and in different forms. You'll recognize it because there's a quality of familiarity when you name it. It will resonate. Write it down as plainly as you can. Then write down every time that the invitation to this lesson has arrived, each situation, each form it took. Don't explain or justify, just list them. And then ask, what does it feel like in your body when this lesson arrives? Is there a tightening, a closing, a familiar weight, a resonance? And where do you feel the resistance to receiving this medicine? Take some time to get curious about that resistance. What would receiving this medicine require you to accept and let go of, perhaps? The medicine will be in recognizing the pattern and feeling what the resistance is about. Second practice, when the medicine becomes the wound. The medicine that Enkidu brought was in checking Gilgamesh's driving, conquering energy, and he ended up enrolling in it. The medicine was recruited by the wound. This happens all the time in our lives. Think of a quality in yourself that you've worked to reclaim or to develop: assertiveness or softness, independence, boundaries, ambition, rest, anger, your voice. Something that felt like real growth when you first contacted it. And now ask honestly, in what ways has that quality taken over rather than found its proper place? Where has it become a new problem rather than the solution to the old one? Write for 15 minutes and ask, where specifically does this show up? What does it look like when it tips from medicine into wound? And what has been the cost to you or to others when it does overshoot? There is no shame in this. This is a natural part of the process of integration for all of us. And this practice is about knowing the difference between bringing your full voice to bear and being consumed by it. Third practice, Siduri's practice. Siduri offered Gilgamesh the simplest medicine imaginable, and he walked straight past it. This practice is an invitation to not do that. For one day this week, just one, set aside the story of where your life is going and bring your full attention to the specific material details of what is actually here. Not what it means, not what it should be, just what it is. The temperature of the water when you wash, the weight of the cup in your hand, the face of someone you love when they don't know that you're watching, the particular quality of the light in a room you pass through every day without seeing, the song of the bird outside your window, a moment when you chose to offer presence instead of finding distraction. At the end of the day, write down 3 things that you really noticed, specific things. Then you can make a point of finding presence in at least 3 moments every day going forward. Regular practice will build it into habit. Gilgamesh needed to travel to the ends of the earth and lose everything before he could look at his walls and simply see them. This practice is the invitation to see yours now before life has to escalate the medicine any further. Gilgamesh set out to conquer death and came home to describe his walls. He was worn into it, and the city was still there, the ordinary, material, human city, waiting for him to finally see it. This is what it looks like when grief does its full work. The wisdom in these old stories waits patiently. I hope this one's medicine found you where you need it. Thank you for listening to Story Medicine. I am Joe Summerfield. Until next time.